Hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. Welcome back to FLA Law Live on the radio. I am glad to have you here tonight. As you know, we come to you live every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with our live legal call-in talk show, where the attorneys here at Parent Caulfield, Averill, Noyes host this legal talk show. We bring in guests from various legal backgrounds and other law firms to talk to you about the law. So if you are a law buff or you just have interest in legal matters and you would like to know more, then this is your show. We hope you tune in every Tuesday. Share it with family members and friends. We are here for the next hour. And I think we have a great, exciting show for you tonight. We have a return guest with us who some of you may remember, and I'm happy to have him back, and I'll introduce you to him in just a moment. But let's get some of the housekeeping matters out of the way at the beginning of the show, because we would, of course, love to hear from you, get your comments and feedback as we go throughout the show tonight. So if you are one who just wants to chime in on the conversation, or you have a question about what we're talking about, then let me know how you can engage us tonight. The first thing is calling into the studio. So that's obviously the first way that you can contact us during the show. That number is going to be 727-441-3000. Again, that's 727-441-3000. That's how you can call in and talk to us tonight during the show and get your questions answered, or just comment on some of the subjects that we'll be bringing up. And then, of course, we also are streaming live right now on Facebook and YouTube. And so if you want to find those live streams, those are on our firm page at Parent Caulfield, Averill and Noyes Injury Lawyers. We just type those in the search bar on Facebook and YouTube. Assuming that you have access to one of those things, then you should be able to find the live feed right now. You can see kind of the red circle around the profile picture that lets you know that we're live. Click on that, and then you can tune in. I'm actually going to share it right now to my friends and family on Facebook. And I'd ask you to do the same. That way, just in case maybe you don't have a question tonight, or you're not really have anything on topic, but you want to share it with friends and family. You never know. They might have something that they are interested in, or it could benefit them down the line, because I think we're going to talk about some really helpful topics that, you may not need it today, but it is always likely that this information can help you down the line so that you're educated and informed if you ever run into this kind of a scenario in the future. So with that being said, we also do have our podcast platform. So if for some reason you got to jump out of the car, you can't listen to the full show tonight, and you want to pick back up where you left off, don't fret. You can absolutely do that on our podcast. So this show will be uploaded later on, and it'll be on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and also on Apple Podcasts. Just search FLA Law on the radio, and you will find all of our past episodes, well, most of them. And then, of course, tonight's episode will be on there as well. So there's no excuse for you not to be able to tune in and listen to the whole show. So do that for us. I believe you will enjoy it. With that being said, I have a very special guest and friend of mine who has actually been on the show, I think, a time or two before. And it's always been a great conversation and informative for our listeners. So, of course, I had to bring him back to talk to you all again. We have criminal defense attorney Zephyrhills Wade, who is joining us again tonight to answer your criminal defense related questions. We're talking about topics regarding traffic stops, DUIs, you name it. And of course, we're going to get into a little bit of a conversation about that viral incident that happened a couple weeks back involving the now infamous charter boat captain who made some pretty strong statements about his capabilities as being one of the best in the country, whatever. But we'll get to that in just a moment. But without further ado, please introduce yourself to our listeners, Zephyrhills, and tell us who you are, what you do, and where you work.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. Like you said, my name is Zechariah. My last name is Wade. I am a current criminal defense attorney here in Pinellas County. I'm a former state prosecutor. I also did that here in Pinellas County, 6th Circuit. While I was a prosecutor, I was a member of the traffic homicide unit, and I handled some pretty high stakes, high profile cases. I'm very proud of that, but I did switch paths and now I practice criminal defense. So I use that experience to help my clients now.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that gives you kind of some unique insight because not everybody can say, that they've worked on both sides of the V, if you will. And in my opinion, I think that gives you a little bit of a leg up when you switch to the other side. But with that being said, from your own perspective, having seen the justice systems from both sides, do you see any type of, uniqueness in the way that you now approach, your cases, having now done that?
I think the most unique aspect of having experience on both sides comes when I speak to my colleagues that maybe didn't practice as a prosecutor before,
Sure.
and they have a question, and it might be something specific about how the state attorney's office operates here in Pinellas County. And because I work there, I know. So I noticed that immediately. But it also kind of tempered me because those are the experienced defense attorneys. They've got 10 years more than me on that side of the V, like you said.
Yeah.
So it comes with some humility, but there's also a huge benefit to knowing how that office works and knowing the people there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Those relationships that you've built, I think, is just kind of invaluable. And I think your clients probably would certainly appreciate that, having that aspect in a defense lawyer. With that being said, I don't think you told us yet where you are currently practicing.
I might have missed that.
Yeah.
I am right now employed with the law offices of Mark N. Pelletier. It's just the two of us in that firm. So Mr. Pelletier is my boss. I call him my guru, though, because that's more of how we interact. He's got a wealth of knowledge, and I really enjoy working and learning with him. So yeah, that's where we are. We're over in St. Pete, but we cater to all of Pinellas County.
Perfect. Now, I know you said when you were on the prosecution side, you did handle a lot of traffic homicide. It sounds like some, heavy matters in that regard. But what are you doing now? What are kind of your main focus and practice areas at your current firm?
Lots of DUIs. We are definitely a beach town here in Pinellas County, so we deal with a lot of DUI allegations, a lot of domestic violence, and that sort of harkens back to my experience as a prosecutor too, because I focused heavily on domestic violence cases. So we do DUIs, domestic violence, drug allegations, violent crime, drug trafficking, high level murder, sexual battery, really any level of crime that a person can be facing or any accusation, we can deal with it.
Well, you brought up a good point about DUIs because we're kind of coming off the tail end of spring break now. And pretty soon we'll be going into like the summer months when school is out and we have, we always have tourists, but I think it kind of fluctuates a lot higher during those months, right? Spring break and then the summer vacation. And it comes with its challenges, I would think, for, the unsuspecting tourists who, might be here in Florida just to have a good time.
Right.
And we know good times can sometimes turn into not so good times. And then they're calling you, right? For something that may have occurred. So I want to talk to you about that because, as you mentioned, look, this is Florida. We live where people vacation. It's a beautiful destination, our beaches and so forth and so on. But it can lead to things that, the partying and the boating and so forth can, people can find themselves in criminal type situations. So with that being said, let's start out kind of with the DUI aspect, and then we'll kind of go down the list. What are some common mistakes that you tend to see when people get pulled over here in Paradise and you're, maybe on the beach or coming off of the beach and they get pulled over? What is something that you start, you immediately say, this is a big red flag or mistake that you often, see?
The first sign is typically taking too long to pull over. And I know that sometimes that might not seem like a big deal. But if you're not from this area and you're not familiar with, the next intersection or what have you, the next exit, then that might cause you a few extra seconds to pull over. But from a law enforcement perspective, they take note of that. And to them, that can be an indicator that you're hiding something or you just really don't want to interact with the police and you're biding your time. So I would say it can start there. It doesn't mean that you need to careen over to the shoulder and cause an accident in the process of pulling over. And there's no requirement in terms of like feet that you have to pull over within. There is a requirement though that it has to be a reasonable distance. You can't just keep passing side streets. So that, and then aside from that, once contact is actually made, talking too much. It's the human condition. We feel like we can explain everything, but law enforcement officers are sponges and they just want to hear everything you have to say. And when they tell you that they'll use it against you, they mean that. So,
for sure.
Yeah. Not pulling over quickly enough and then talking too much are the two big ones.
I can see that for sure. I think I tell clients sometimes that, I've never really met a person who talked too much and it ended up helping them.
Right.
It usually goes the other way because same as law enforcement, I imagine most defense lawyers on the civil side, they are going to keep listening and giving you all the rope you need. And eventually that rope is going to hang, you're going to hang on it. So I agree 100%. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy when we're doing all the chit chat and talking. So with that being said, I think I know the answer then to my next question, because that was just my next is, should they just stay silent or should they talk? I mean, maybe there's a very valid explanation for why they didn't immediately stop. And I just want to explain to you, I had to go to the bathroom and my house is right there. And I was just going to pull into the driveway, Yeah.
And so, I mean, like I said, it's the human condition to want to explain, but it is better not to. And that's uncomfortable in the moment. If you think about a moment where a law enforcement officer reads Miranda and they say, okay, now having those rights in mind, do you want to speak to me? That's the moment where some people would say, wait a minute. No, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
But even before Miranda is read, you can stop talking. The hard part is that is so uncomfortable. Yeah. If you get pulled over, whether you did anything wrong or not, and the police officer says license registration, and they ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? We're humans. We want to respond. But if you're concerned at all that, what you say might lead to a search, or if there's an issue that you're concerned with in terms of the validity of your license or anything like that, the best thing to do is just exercise your right to remain silent from the jump. I mean, you still have to identify yourself. You still have to give over those documents, but you're not required to speak. And I think that's something that most people have a hard time grasping in terms of what it looks like in real time.
Well, then tell me about that then, because you say you still have to identify yourself and give over documents. So to what extent does that apply? So what exactly do you have to give over? What do you have to identify versus things that they may ask for that you say, wait a minute now, I don't have to give you that information?
Well, definitely your license, registration, proof of insurance. Those are the things that you should absolutely have in your car ready. I keep mine behind my visor. Obviously, my license is in my wallet, but those documents are in my visor. That way I don't have to reach for anything. I can just flip it down, hand it over. And that's the way that can look, is when the officer's standing there and they ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? It might seem like you're being rude, but you're actually, in some cases, protecting yourself if you don't say anything at all. Instead, just hand them the documents and sit there.
And that's what I was just about to say, because I could just imagine how strange that interaction could become if, in fact, you say nothing. Because you mentioned that the officer, they're sponges, so they're listening to everything you're saying and they're absorbing it and potentially going to use it against you. But on the converse, if you are absolutely silent, and does that then come across as being uncooperative or resistant? And now they have that to be able to say they didn't cooperate with any of my commands, or, you know what I'm saying?
And I think what determines how that situation develops is really the person driving, right? If you know that you have done nothing wrong, your license is valid, there's nobody else in your car, there's nothing in your car, you just don't feel like dealing with a police officer, you can be quiet. But in all seriousness, in that situation, just give them your info. You can have a cordial conversation. What I'm really speaking to is a situation where someone
you have a
you're riding dirty.
You know what you have.
You might not be legitimate in this one instance. Every other time you're an upstanding citizen,
right,
but this is a bad day,
right.
and you know that if you talk too much or give away too much information, you increase the likelihood of you going to jail. So that's what I'm really speaking to. If you know that there might be something working against you, then the best thing to do is really be quiet.
Yeah,
it's uncomfortable, but it works.
You brought up a good point earlier about you having to identify yourself. And I'm just thinking of a scenario of, maybe young people, teenagers, even on the beach, forget their ID, but they've been hanging out. And then the officer asks, but they don't have any identification. How does that really play into it?
Well, law enforcement has a plethora of databases at their disposal. So there are different ways that they can ID you. And if you were to tell an officer, excuse me, I don't have my ID, the next thing they're going to ask you is what's your date of birth, your full name, your date of birth. They might even ask for your social because they can confirm your identity. And most officers that I've come into contact with are reasonable in that regard. They're not going to give you a hard time just because you don't have your ID on you. They'll work with you and try to ID you.
That's good to know.
In other situations where people refuse to identify themselves, law enforcement can use other pieces of technology like fingerprint scanners, facial recognition software right there on scene to tell who you are.
Really? Didn't know that about the facial recognition. But now everything is facial recognition.
Yep, AI is
I shouldn't be surprised about that. Because it kind of harkens back. My question harkens back to a situation when I was a teenager. I think I was probably maybe 18. And I put myself out there, but I had a tail light that was out and I got pulled over. Cop was very, very nice. And he's like, I know you knew because you put on your hazard light as soon as you saw me behind you. I was like, that's what I was supposed to have done. But anyway, my passenger did not have an ID on them. And I remember the officer saying something about you having to have that. And he was like, well, I'm not driving. I didn't have anything on him. And he made a comment almost like, I could do something, I don't know. I don't want to say he would arrest him, but some steps could have been taken for him failing to have that ID on. And I was like, really? He's not even driving the car. But of course, that was years ago, and I never really inquired about it further. And he didn't give the guy a ticket, but I just wondered, is that accurate? That everyone kind of has to have that ID and be able to identify themselves. Yeah.
Florida's not a stop and ID state. And what that really means is that for a passenger in a car who's not suspected of committing any type of crime or anything like that, the officer has every right to ask, hey, what's your name? Do you have your ID? And if you hand it over, cool, we're doing business, but you don't have to in that situation. Okay. But there's always a caveat with the law, right? There's always a but, because in other circumstances, say, for example, the passenger is on probation. Well, then they operate under different rules. They have to consent to a search if that officer identifies them as someone who's on probation, that kind of thing. If that person is stuffing something down their shorts and it seems like they're concealing evidence or something like that, it can lead the officers to go that route. But just on a threshold traffic stop, their focus is going to be on the driver.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now, next scenario. Let's say you are a little young. You've been hanging out and partying, and you have an ID, but it's not a real ID. And you present this fake ID to law enforcement. What kind of implications could you be looking at?
You could be arrested. Possession of a false ID is a crime. You could be arrested. Most times, I think the person who comes across that is going to be a bouncer, a doorman at a bar or a club. Of course. And what I typically, read or hear about them doing is keeping it. And they'll just say, get out of here. You can't have it back. Yeah. You're not coming in. Yeah.
Again, we all have a past, but I know of people, and it wasn't me, I promise, where, that was common. You get a big sister's ID so you can get into the club or the party or whatever. But at times, if you're driving home, maybe you have a valid driver's license, but you don't have one to be where you were. And you ended up giving that license to the officer. There could be, is that criminal? I mean, a misdemeanor?
So you're describing a situation where you get pulled over and you have a valid license, but you don't have it on you. That's a failure to display or a failure to carry. That's a citation. Right. And so it's not criminal. It's going to cost you some money, and it's going to get your heart beating because nobody likes to be pulled over by the police. But that's not criminal. As long as your license is valid and you just don't have it on you.
Good to know. Yeah, because I've heard all kinds of things. I think I had a friend who her sister gave her name And then the sister didn't have a valid license. It was a mess. So people, have your license valid and give your real identity to the police. So that's the takeaway for me, at least from what I've seen over the years.
Keep that thing on you.
Exactly. Now, going back to the DUI scenario, not to talk, I think is certainly something that most people understand. Do they do it? No, but I think most people understand they shouldn't talk. But I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes down to a breathalyzer or field sobriety testing. If the officer is now taking those steps after they've been pulled over, what can they refuse? What should they refuse? And that sort of thing. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, excuse me, because we all have free will, you do have the right to refuse the exercises. Mm-hmm. You also have the right to refuse the breath test. But everyone, if you look at your license, I believe it's on the back. There's a line that specifically says, having a license in Florida means that you're consenting to field sobriety exercises. Mm-hmm. And part of the DUI investigation, obviously, is that. Mm-hmm. So what happens if you refuse those exercises? Really, refusing the exercises is one thing. Refusing the breath test is where it really gets in the way of your driving ability. Because in the state of Florida, if you refuse the breath test, your license will be suspended. Period. That's just how that starts.
And that's my understanding. So they essentially would take the license from you at that point, right?
Correct. Your license gets suspended. So when you're arrested for DUI, at the outset, your license gets suspended if you blow over the legal limit or if you refuse the breath test. Mm-hmm. You have the ability to get a hardship license to kind of get around and handle your business while the case is pending. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people don't know is that there's a second suspension period that starts on the day you resolve the case.
Gotcha.
So that hits people kind of hard when they realize that you have to deal with effectively a year of no driving.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So then let's say there's a situation where, they are refusing the breathalyzer, but ultimately, let's say that the charges are dropped or it's no pros or something like that. What ends up happening then when that license was taken away from that individual who refused to give the breathalyzer, but they ended up beating the charges?
That's a fantastic question. And the status of the law is that if you refuse the breath test, mm-hmm. your license gets suspended. There's no caveat in the statute that says if you refuse the breath test and later on, we find out that the case was dismissed, mm-hmm. that doesn't negate what happened with the DHSMV. One, because the case might have been dismissed for a different reason.
Sure.
Maybe police did something wrong.
Sure.
So it doesn't always impact, but yeah.
That makes sense. Wow. So you have to really think long and hard about that decision, I guess. But you can get like hardship licenses and things like that if that happens, right?
Absolutely. In most situations, if you get consecutive DUIs, mm-hmm. arrests itself, you might be prohibited from getting a hardship license. But that first one, it's pretty common that mm-hmm. if you get arrested and you're under that initial 6-month or 9-month suspension, mm-hmm. then your license is going to be suspended and you can get a hardship. Right. At least keep working, go to see your lawyer, things like that.
Yeah. I just thought about this video that I saw. I don't know if you saw it online, but it was pretty funny. I wish I could play the clip because it was a woman who clearly seemed to be intoxicated. And she just kept challenging the officers, like, you do the test. I'm not doing it. You do it. You can't even do it. And he's like, well, I'm not the one here that's being tested. And he's like, well, you walk the straight line. It was just this whole back and forth. Hilarious. So if I can find it, I'll make sure I share it with you.
Sure.
But she was kind of the poster child of what not to do. And she kept changing like what she drank and how much she drank and when she drank. And it was quite funny. So in my review of that as a non-criminal defense attorney, I would have told her just shut the hell up.
And just stop talking.
Stop talking. So let's go back to the beach scenario. Obviously, again, it's April very soon. School will be out. College will be, exams are going to be ending soon. And so we'll see a lot of activity on the beaches. And so what I am not very familiar with, and I'm hoping that you can shed some light on, are the rules in regards to drinking on the beach, open containers, and those sorts of things.
Sure. Pinellas County is actually unique in this regard because as you travel, I think that's Gulf Boulevard on the, right there on the beaches. Mm-hmm. As you go north and south on that road, you're going to hit a lot of different municipalities.
Yeah, they change as you drive down. Yeah.
Right. And you don't always recognize it. Mm-hmm. So you're in a different city and didn't know. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think each one of these municipalities has their own ordinances in place in terms of alcohol on the beach. So no-go is Clearwater. That's the big one because that's one of our most popular beaches and people love to go there. But having alcohol on Clearwater Beach is actually an arrestable offense, or at least it was when I prosecuted at the state. That might have changed by now. But what that means is if a police officer sees you drinking alcohol on the beach in Clearwater, they have the discretion to take you to jail. And that's a huge upset for someone here on vacation. So Clearwater's a no-go.
That'll put a damper in your trip.
Absolutely. Not a good time. Not one of your trips on the vacation, right? Not one that you planned. But
so let's say, can they go to a different beach? Can they go to Indian Rocks? Can they go to John's Pass?
I want to, and I fact check me on this because I'm going to list them, and I just want to make sure I'm not setting anybody up. But based on my research, Madeira Beach, I want to say Indian Rocks Beach, and there's another one that I can't even think of right now.
Island?
Yes, thank you. Treasure Island. They do allow alcohol on the beach. St. Pete allows it in certain circumstances. Last I read is that if you order it from like a beach bar or a hotel or something like that, then you can have, I think it has to be served to you essentially. It has to be in a plastic cup, no cans, no bottles, right? You can't bring your cooler full of beer out on the beach. So, and that's important to know because that's not something that I think a person would naturally look up when you're booking a hotel.
Not at all.
But it's important because it can cost you.
Yeah, it absolutely can have very steep consequences, especially like you said, if you're just kind of strolling down the beach. It might have been okay there, and then you just walked a couple miles down the road and it's not okay.
Yeah, I was at the beach this weekend actually, and I had an almost uncomfortable situation because there was a group and they were drinking and I just wanted to give them a heads up. So I walked over there and I was like, hey, you guys, and I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm not a cop. I just wanted to give you a heads up though, that you can't have open alcohol. They could take you to jail.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where they were kind of like, why are you talking to me?
Who are you?
But then they realized what I was saying and they're like,
you're trying to help them out. Yeah. That was very kind of you. So yeah, I mean, this is, again, it's becoming a big thing in our area where there's so many different modes of travel now. We have e-bikes and e-scooters and just different things like downtown as well. And I'm speaking downtown St. Pete, where you can kind of rent them and get around on them. And so
those are fun.
People may consider that, hey, I'm not going to get behind the wheel of my car when I've been drinking. I'll just take an e-bike or an e-scooter and get to where I need to go and bar hop or whatever. Is that a valid mode of transportation if you're intoxicated?
I was going to say, if you get on an e-scooter and you're impaired, you might end up with an e-DUI because it's not limited to cars, trucks, and motorcycles. It's
that's what people really need to know.
Bicycles. You can get a DUI on a horse. Stagecoach, really anything that moves and can be operated on the roadway. I saw a viral video of an Amish man who was passed out.
No way.
He was intoxicated and his horse was taking him home. So, he's still subject to the law. But
the horse wasn't intoxicated.
No, that's a good point. But he was actually in the driver's seat. He had the reins. So, and that's what it is. That's hilarious. I imagine that it'd be fairly easy to pick up a DUI on an e-scooter. Now, if you're on the sidewalk minding your own business, then why would you draw anyone's attention? But if you're weaving through traffic and rushing it through the bike lane and things like that, you're gonna get somebody's attention. You can absolutely get that DUI. Yeah,
and so the standard then would be quite the same as if you were stopped in traffic. The advice or tips you would give on an e-scooter or an e-bike are essentially the same, right?
Absolutely.
You got to produce that ID and shut up, basically.
Yeah, exactly. In that order.
Good. Well, look, I have a nice segue. I'd like to talk to you about boating because obviously we know that, now we know that those other modes of transportation, you can still get a DUI on. I'd like to talk to you about boating in just a second, but I think it's a good time for us to take a short commercial break. So we will stop for about a minute or two, get a short break, listen to the commercial, and then we'll be back with Zechariah Wade, who's with us tonight, giving you some tips on criminal defense law. Right after this break, we'll see you in just a moment.
This is the TAN Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Pernick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Paranek, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the TAN Talk Radio Network.
And we're back from that short break. Hopefully you have been tuned in since 5. This is FLA Law live on the radio. But if you're just joining us, then welcome. We have attorney Zachariah Wade, who is a local criminal defense lawyer who is joining us tonight, giving you all the tips and the need to know when it comes to being pulled over for DUI, traffic stops, and just kind of things that you may need to have a little bit of knowledge about when you are enjoying our beaches, celebrating, partying, having fun. We know the summertime is coming up, and that is very common in our area. And so hopefully you've been listening, but if not, these shows will be posted online on our podcast later on. So follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Pretty much wherever you listen to your podcast, you can find us, FLA Law on the radio. Look for this show and you can catch the beginning if you missed it. Share it with your friends and family. Tell them to tune in. We have Attorney Z on the radio and he is answering all your questions tonight. So with that being said, the lines are still open, 727-441-3000. We'd love to hear from you. But we kind of touched on, of course, DUIs in vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters, stagecoaches, you name it. Before I jump into boats, because I do want to talk about that in just a second, but I also thought about something else that we're seeing a lot of lately. And I low-key kind of want one, these golf carts, right? Nice. So everybody and their mom, it seems, has a golf cart these days. Some of them I see with tags on them. Some of them don't have tags. You know, some of them I see on the road. Some of them are kind of like in residential areas. What's the deal with these golf carts? And I assume you can get a DUI on that too, right?
Well, absolutely. You can get a DUI. And I want to jump back 1 second because I said something before we took a break that was inaccurate. And I want to correct myself.
Sure.
I said earlier that if you refuse the breath test, your license gets suspended for 6 months. That's not accurate. It's a year. If you blow over, then it's 6 months. So I just want to make sure I'm not giving out any wrong information. But back to golf carts. Golf carts are actually similar to the conversation we just had about open containers on the beach because we have a lot of different neighborhoods and municipalities here in Pinellas County, and a lot of them treat golf carts differently. I think it's in the city of Dunedin. I could be wrong, but it's either you either have to drive it on the street or you can't drive it on the sidewalk, one of those. And that's why it would have to be registered. It have to be, if you're going to drive it on the street, it has to be what they call street legal. In other situations, you can't drive on the street at all. So it really just depends on where you are. I would advise looking up those rules before you buy the golf cart because golf carts are expensive.
They are.
Like little cars.
Yeah, they are. But they're so cute. I feel like whenever we go to the park with my kids, it's like their families are pulling up in the golf carts. And I'm
I feel like you've arrived as a family when your family pulls up somewhere and everybody has their own seat.
So, but for sure, the law still applies when it comes to drinking and golf carting.
Absolutely.
So people, obviously be aware. Don't think that that's some sort of workaround because I wasn't in my car. I was in my golf cart. Nope. Same thing applies, right?
I would say I'm a lawyer, so I always think about the what if, and I would just say that the one situation where I think that you could probably drink and drive a golf cart without any concern for law enforcement is if you're on the golf course. Okay. That's just a lawyer and me finding an exception.
That makes sense. You're going from hole to hole. Yeah.
Be safe now.
But obviously everything within reason and limits. So we drink responsibly even on the golf course. The distance that you're driving is going to be a lot shorter, but you never know, things can happen. So, but with that being said, I just wanted to bring that up because I see this a lot lately, especially with the e-bikes and the e-scooters. So I thought that would be good for listeners, but for the select few, there's obviously, we're in Florida. We have beautiful beaches and a lot of people come here to put their boats out on the water. And so I would imagine, but of course I don't want to presume anything, but I would imagine that the rules around drinking while driving a boat would be similar, but if not, please let us know. Is boating under the influence a thing?
Boating under the influence is absolutely a thing. Mm-hmm. And I think what gets people in trouble with that is that you can have alcohol on a boat. Yeah. You can have open containers of alcohol on a boat. Not the captain, right? We don't want to see that. Yeah, but in a vehicle, in a car, in a truck, you absolutely cannot have any open containers of alcohol. So I think that is what ends up getting people to sort of blur that line. Sure. But the rules remain the same. The breath alcohol limit is the same. It's 0.08. There are specific field sobriety exercises that typically it's FWC, Florida Wildlife Commission, that handles BUI investigation, because they're the guys out on the water most often, and they have a different battery of field sobriety exercises that they run people through instead of having you walk a line on a moving boat. I literally
just wrote my note, like, what are they testing for? So.
Yeah, they have different exercises that really you can do while you're sitting down. They focus more on your hands. You have to do things like, count how many times you did this versus how many times you do that, move your hands down. There's a lot of technical steps, but it operates the same way as normal field sobriety exercises. But in other situations, I've seen law enforcement simply escort a person to land and do field sobriety exercises there, because it requires a different level of training and certification to be able to administer those exercises. And if the officer hasn't been trained to do them, then he's going to default to the normal.
Yeah. And obviously, if you haven't really encountered this, then that's fair. But I'm just curious that how do these, boating under the influence cases even come about? Because I would imagine you're on the water, there's all kinds of motion, and it's not like, normal traffic where you roll through a stop sign or you're weaving in and out of a lane. You don't really have that on the water. So how do you even identify if someone might be boating under the influence? I mean, that seems difficult. Yeah.
Well, I see it most commonly come from two scenarios. One is a vessel safety check. Because you're on a boat, a law enforcement officer can pull up to you, tie up to your boat, and ask you to go through the inventory of your boat. You have to have a life preserver, a personal flotation device is what it's called, for every person on board. I think you've got to have a flare, a whistle, some things like that. There are certain things you have to have, and they're allowed to ask you to go through your boat. That interaction right there can lead to so many questions, such as, I smell alcohol. Has anybody been drinking? Have you been drinking? Your eyes are red. So that's how it can develop. On the other side is that just like there are stop signs and merge signs and things like that on the road, there are rules of the water too. And you're trained, if you're operating a vessel, to treat the water almost like the highway, because there are no wake zones, there are minimum wake zones, there are I don't know if there's necessarily speed zones, but it really is determined by your wake, right? How much of the water you're displacing. And if you're on plane, for people who don't drive boats, that means if you're moving really fast in a no wake zone, right, then you're going to get law enforcement's attention. So those are two ways that I really see it happen, is just not obeying the rules of operating your vessel, or just being on the water, period.
And do you find that there's a big law enforcement presence on the water?
Yes. And I think that the by and large, the agencies that you see on the water most are the sheriff's office and FWC. And I know some of those guys, and I think they do a good job. They're out there a lot. And if you think about it, that's a tough gig, to be outside all day in the sun and to be focused on doing your job. So shout out to them. Definitely.
I'm 100% keeping our waterways safe. With that being said, that brings us to this viral story that happened a couple weeks ago, maybe about a month now. And I think it caught everyone's attention just because of the interaction between, what appeared to be an older gentleman and a younger guy. So the power dynamic, I think, was a bit off-putting for a lot of people, seeing that what occurred. But what I'm talking about is this incident back at the beginning of the month involving Brock Horner, who essentially is a charter boat captain locally, but the incident happened down, I think, in Punta Gorda on Peace River, if I'm not mistaken. And so what people might recall in this viral video, I'm thinking the young guy might have had like a GoPro or something attached to him. And you just see this guy kind of yelling at him about something that had happened earlier, I guess in the day, some sort of speeding incident that he was upset about. I think he might have assumed that this guy was involved or did it or something like that, or it was his boat that was the one that was speeding. And so they get into this big, exchange, and he's yelling and screaming and declaring himself to be the best charter boat captain in the world or whatnot. But anyway, essentially he gets really close to this younger guy's boat, and then ultimately gets on the boat.
Yeah.
And he's screaming at the guy and comes towards him kind of in a threatening manner. And all this is captured on the video. And so what I understand, of course, you can certainly correct me, because this article that I'm about to read is a little bit outdated. I think it was posted in the beginning when it first happened. But what we see is Brock Horner, 40, was taken into custody and charged with burglary, assault or battery, and non-forced entry. So on April 4th, Horner, who basically was captured on the video, was seen pulling his boat alongside the younger gentleman, Gage Towles. Without his permission, he unlawfully boarded it, apparently, according to a news release from the Punta Gorda Police Department and the U.S. Coast Guard. I guess it was a joint release with the Florida Wildlife Commission as well. They essentially are accusing Horner of escalating the incident, which basically made it a criminal offense, according to the investigators. At this time, it was still under investigation with the U.S. Coast Guard and the Florida Wildlife Commission. And what the police department was saying at that time is that this type of behavior is not tolerated on the waterways or anywhere else in our city. And that was coming from the Punta Gorda Police Chief, Pam Smith. And they said that they're committed to ensuring the safety of their residents and the visitors, both on land and in the water. And at the time, he was in jail, which I believe he's now been released, of course. But what are your thoughts on that? So is he charged with burglary? How can this be burglary? And I'm just looking at it from a sense of, the layperson who's watching this video, like, man, this was really stupid of him to kind of threaten this kid and jump on his boat. And he just came off as a jerk, but is that criminal? And apparently it is. So let's get into that.
Sure. I think at the beginning of that video, the Captain Brock, he's screaming at the kid. He's obviously irate. I think right then and there's nothing criminal going on. Not even the most petty of crimes, which would be like disorderly conduct, right? They're screaming, but it's not that bad. There is that moment though, where you see Captain Brock sort of, steer his boat closer, and you can tell that he's getting closer. The main focus in that video for me is, I think his name is Gage. Yes. He calls himself a kid, but I think he was actually 22.
He's actually in his early 20s, yeah.
But he's afraid. Yeah. And it's not hard to identify fear. And you can almost hear his voice shaking when he says, I'm a kid. A person who's not a kid telling you that he's a kid, that's fear. Yeah. And I think that there was definitely an opportunity for Captain Brock to sort of de-escalate from there. But getting to the thing that he's actually charged with, the crime that he's charged with, burglary with assault or battery, that really stood out to me, because I think, honestly, in terms of what's objectively seen on video, that was the right charge. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because charges like that stack. And what I mean by that is at the bottom, you have trespassing, which there's two ways to trespass. Either ignore that sign that says no trespassing, or be somewhere and someone has asked you to leave and you're not doing it. That's trespassing. Okay. Stepping up from that is burglary. And burglary is effectively trespassing with the intent to commit a crime.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? If I break in this place and I'm dressed in all black and I have a bag and gloves and all that, clearly I'm here to burglarize this place because I want to steal. Now, burglary with battery, we call that burgbat in the legal world because it's just shorter. That happens when you commit that burglary, meaning you enter with the intent to commit a crime. State doesn't necessarily have to prove what that crime is.
Sure. I was just about to ask, well, then how do you know what the crime is?
Just provable that you were there to do something wrong.
Gotcha.
And you, in so doing, you touch someone or do anything to make them feel like they are immediately about to be touched or harmed against their will. That's now burglary with battery assault. That's a first-degree felony. Right. And that's punishable by life in prison. Wow. And that stuck out to me so much from this case, because that shows how easy it is to fall into a terrible situation because you couldn't keep your cool.
Yeah. So. And that's what they're calling it, boat rage, essentially. So then the fact that and I it's been a little while since I've seen the actual video, but from what I could recall, it didn't appear that he actually physically touched him. Like I didn't see any physical contact. So the fact that there was no physical contact does not necessarily change the charge. No,
I think it's hard to see exactly where they are and where people's hands are moving and things like that. But from what I could tell, Captain Brock got on Gage's vessel from, I don't know, like port and starboard, all that. So I'm just going to say the right side of the boat.
Like I wouldn't be able to correct you if you were wrong. So.
Well, and then so he came on the boat from the back and then walked up towards the island, right? That center console.
Yep.
And so to me, that right there is what invoked the fear. It really just put the cherry on top, because not only did you get on my boat, but now you're walking towards me. And when Gage is saying, please, please, that's fear. He is clearly in fear that he's about to be hit. Yeah. And if you think about it from another perspective, what else was Captain Brock prepared to do?
Yeah.
I mean, you came across, you moved your boat over here, you got on the water, you're screaming, you're irate.
And he's telling him, you better apologize.
Yeah, tell him apologize. And he does too. I'm sorry. But at the beginning of the video, he told Captain Brock, that wasn't even me. I was here, but that wasn't even me. He just kind of wanted to be angry at somebody.
He wasn't listening at all. Yeah. So then from the defense perspective, so let's put on the defense hat and let's say Captain Brock is sitting in your office, and I've heard facts that he is a veteran, and that he has apparently a diagnosis of PTSD.
I heard that too,
and that that may have played a factor somewhat in the interaction, right? How does that play in at all in the defense of Captain Brock?
I'd say categorically, there's two areas of information that need to be presented to the state attorney's office down there. And this is just me, speaking me. Obviously, I'm not Brock's attorney.
Sure.
But circumstantially, I would focus on anything that is relevant before that day, meaning his service to our country, the fact that he has PTSD, which obviously I think something was triggered in him. That's not a normal human reaction.
Right.
And I would focus on how, I think it was like 2 days before this interaction where they're, the original event happened that made this captain so upset. I would focus on that and how maybe that could have triggered his PTSD. The hard part is that there's a gap between that trigger and his reaction. So that's one piece of information.
The time that had passed in between.
Yeah, like it's been 2 days, relax. And he just told you it's not him. So that's hard to explain, but I would couple that with everything that he's done since his arrest. I would say he definitely needs some anger management. So knock that out, maybe take a drug test just to show that this is not a chemically induced response. This is something that you're dealing with internally, and then present that information to show how you're dealing with it.
Yeah.
You need some counseling. You need to show some accountability. And I think coming from a first degree felony punishable by life, there are ways to get that charge worked down. A lot of it will depend on Gage's feelings, but there are ways to minimize the damage that was done.
Yeah. Now I've heard, and you can obviously comment on this more than I can, but I've heard in certain circumstances, like going back to the DUI situation, which if you know that you're facing those charges, if you proactively start going to like AA meetings or taking, classes or like, what is it? Mothers or parents against drunk
Mothers
driving.
Against Drunk Driving.
And you do those kinds of things that can somehow help. And so in these situations, if like you mentioned, anger management, he goes to counseling, he can submit records to the court showing that, I'm already proactively working on this issue. How does that tend to factor in, if anything?
It's hard to say because every case really is different. In a case like this one, it's on video. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot of back and forth that's going to happen in terms of disputing the facts.
Or
we
don't
know
believe
what
your
happened.
lying eyes. Yeah.
Right. So in this situation, that mitigation is going to, in my opinion, matter a lot more. Because we don't have any dispute about what happened. What's important is that we understand how you got there and how that situation impacted you moving forward. That's how he can minimize the damage there. But, I don't know. I'm assuming he doesn't have a prior record. Yeah, essentially. I don't think he has to worry about prison or anything like that. I can't really second guess what the court would do, but he can minimize the damage.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I've never really knew if those kinds of things really had a big sway on at least the degree of the charge, or if that's just more of a sentence.
I'll say it like this. It can help you if you do them. It might not, right? It's not a guarantee doing those things, but I feel more strongly about the fact that it will harm you if you don't.
Yeah.
If you let those months of your case go by, we get to the end and your lawyer's trying to negotiate with the state and you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
That is what's going to harm you.
I can see that for sure. So obviously, we'll see how that ends up playing out for him. But I know that it seemed like it was quite a bit of an uproar for him and his business and his family. So,
and the other guys on the boat too. I think there were like 4 other gentlemen on that boat, and they got some backlash. They posted videos separating themselves, like, "Hey." Yeah,
I mean, I think people were kind of disappointed in the fact that these older gentlemen didn't intervene in any way and say, "Hey, calm it down." So. Overall, that was just quite an unfortunate incident, but I don't know where things stand with his charges. But like you said, if he doesn't have any history of priors, he takes kind of those proactive steps. I would hope that he's not, necessarily going to see jail time, but big lesson learned. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
With that being said, we've talked about some interesting cases, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, if there's anything that stands out in your mind before we start to wrap up the show, of any just really weird, very Florida-ish, like, this is only a Florida type thing where you're like, I would never see this happen anywhere else, but this is the kind of case that's like a weird Florida thing. Do you have anything like that you can think of?
I don't know if it's a weird Florida thing, because I love my state.
Yes,
I don't, when people say Florida, man, to me, that's a badge of honor. So I did have an interesting case when I was prosecuting. This case is resolved now, but there was an individual that he was originally charged with it's like petty theft. Like he literally stole a bag of chips out of a store. Okay. And that is how the case came to us. And but because he had done it a few times before, it was a felony. So
I was going to say, now that takes a lot for them to say, you know what, we're going to actually,
we're tired of this.
We're going to prosecute on this bag of chips. So, okay. So this was a pattern of behavior.
Right.
I got you.
And so while I'm investigating that case, we have video from the convenience store that shows what he did. And then not long after that, I'm handling another case, but they basically overlapped. And we found out, jumping to the end, that after he simply stole a bag of chips here, he hopped on his bike, went over here and robbed a person at gunpoint. And that was just
oh my gosh,
you just don't care. Like you're just, you take whatever you want, chips, money, freedom, whatever. It was really interesting. Another one is, it was actually it helped me understand more about the criminal process, because there was a set of twins and their name was so similar. I think like it was one letter off between their first names, and obviously last name is the same. Like
even your name, I have twin cousins. It's like Zachariah and Zachary or something like that. They're so close, and I'm like, I always get them confused.
I met a woman named Zacharia, but I was like, that's different.
Your twin sister, no?
But so long story short, there was a warrant out for. It wasn't
one of the
a
twins.
Warrant. There was an accusation that one of the twins committed the crime. Law enforcement agency doesn't need to be named, but they went through their entire investigation and arrested one of them. Had the wrong one.
Oh my god!
And as a prosecutor, I got a call from their
let's
mom.
not name them.
The mom called me and was like, "You guys got it wrong. Like this is what's going on." So that actually taught me the process of administratively undoing criminal charges, and that can be done in unique circumstances. So
oh my goodness,
that's one that stands out.
Parents, be careful when you
name your kids.
Name your kids.
Keep it
so
simple.
Closely to that. You have the good twin, bad twin syndrome. Well, look, Zachariah, it has been a pleasure. Attorney Z, I want you to give everybody your socials and information on how to find you. We hope that they never need you, but look, life happens, especially in our lovely, beautiful state of Florida, when we have so many different just opportunities to have fun, and that fun can sometimes lead into things that you just aren't anticipating, right?
Yeah.
So with that being said, give them all your info before we close out.
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. My name is Zachariah Wade, and that is also the name of my Facebook page. So I'm there. My Instagram is Zachariah Wade ESQ, stands for Esquire, just for those who were wondering. And my phone number, I give all of my clients my cell phone number. I know a lot of lawyers say that, but I really do that. If you call this number, this phone rings. It's 727-310-2908. One more time, that's 310-2908. You can call or text or just send me a DM on social. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And folks, that has been FLA Law live on the radio. We will see you back next Tuesday at 5 o'clock.